Good afternoon and welcome to the FEMA Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness Webinar Series. My name is Allison Albright and I'm the Regional Preparedness Liaison for FEMA Region 2. I'm going to provide a few technical considerations before we begin. Today's proceedings are being recorded and captioned. The archived event will be available on the FEMA website in the coming weeks. You should hear audio through your computer speakers, so please ensure your volume is turned up so you may hear the proceedings accordingly. The webcam functionality today will only be used by our presenter. In the middle right-hand side of the screen, we ask if you'd like to receive news and updates. Got my switch. We'll have the question box there. And in this box, you can submit your questions about the subject matter there. Please do not include any personal information or case-specific information for the question session today. The resource from today will be available for you to download in the file SharePod as a PDF. You can click on the file and download it using the download button. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our Region 2 Community Preparedness Officer to introduce our speaker and today's proceedings.
Do you know that FEMA's individual assistance programs ensure that disaster survivors have timely access to a full range of programs and services to maximize their recovery through coordination among local, state, federal, tribal governments, voluntary agencies, and the private sector? In response to the financial stress and burden this pandemic has caused families, FEMA's individual assistance program is offering funeral assistance nationwide to provide financial support for funeral costs specifically related to coronavirus disease. Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Casa, the Community Preparedness Officer for FEMA Region 2. On behalf of our team working to strengthen preparedness across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, I'd like to welcome you to our Preparedness Webinar Series. The Region 2 Individual and Community Preparedness Program is focused on preparing individuals and communities for disasters by providing useful information and training, inspiring people to act and be ready for any emergency. This webinar will provide information regarding the implementation of this new funeral assistance policy and guidance on applicability, conditions of eligibility, required documentation, and other important topics. Our speaker today is Julie Blanchek, the Individual Assistance Branch Chief for FEMA Region 2. She has been with FEMA for 10 years and has also served as a Headquarters and Region 2 Voluntary Agency Liaison. She has supported disasters nationwide, including Hurricane Sandy, Irma, and Maria, and the 2020 Puerto Rico Three Kings Day earthquakes. Julie began her career in emergency management, a Hurricane Katrina volunteer with the American Red Cross, and worked for the Greater New York chapter, responding to dozens of events throughout the region, including the 2009 U.S. Airways Flight 1549, Miracle on the Hudson. Julie, I'd like to turn the mic over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much, Deb and Allison, for hosting us this afternoon. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. As you know, FEMA plays a role in responding to and recovering from many types of disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, and also including the federally declared disasters due to the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID has affected us all in some way, and many have suffered a loss of a loved one. There were two recent acts, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 and the more recent American Rescue Act of 2021, FEMA has been directed to provide funeral assistance to COVID-19 related, for COVID-19 related funeral expenses. And we are dedicated to helping ease some of the financial stress and burden through this program. I do want to provide a little bit of a disclaimer. Today we have a lot of information to share with you. But before I proceed, I want to clarify that we'll only be discussing general information, including what you need to know before you apply, eligibility requirements, and required documentation. However, we will not be able to address any questions related to specific applications, and we've provided in the one of the chat boxes, the presentation notes, the web address, which will provide more information, including FAQs, frequently asked questions, and we have also provided the call center number for you to start your application or to reach out to speak to a call center agent. Moving to the next slide, please. Okay, so funeral assistance did begin last Monday, April 12th. As of today, we already have over 100,000 applications submitted. This program is being administered at the national level, so that means that there's one call center that will process all applications regardless of the state or the disaster declaration, and that is determined by the place that the death occurred. So we are, tribal members are eligible to apply through the state, territorial, or DC disaster declaration for COVID-19. And we welcome tribal governments to continue to work directly through FEMA Region 2 office or other offices on any issues pertaining to the program. Because the program is federally managed and administered, regardless of which declaration applies, the payments will be provided directly to the individual applicants, and I will touch a little bit on that a little later. Would you move to the next slide, please? Okay, there are a few conditions of eligibility. The first is that the applicant must be a United States citizen, a non-citizen national, or a qualified alien. They also must have incurred expenses after January 20th, 2020. However, there's no requirement for the deceased or the decedent to have been a U.S. citizen, non-citizen national, or qualified alien. The death must have occurred within the United States, one of our territories, or the District of Columbia, and it must be attributed to COVID-19. A few things for you to know before you or about the application process. So we are only accepting applications via a dedicated call center. There will not be any online registrations. And call center hours on Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. For those who need assistance in another language, options will be provided during the call. And the total time of the application process should only take about 20 minutes. Now, before you call to apply, there are a few things you should have ready. That includes your social security number, date of birth, email, mailing address, contact phone numbers, and yes, your household annual gross income. You will be asked, but I do want to clarify that the program is not income dependent, and your income will not impact your eligibility. You will be asked, but it will not impact your eligibility. You will also be asked to provide the name, social security number, and date of birth of the deceased individual. Hello? Can you make sure you're on, please?
Yeah, please make sure your phones are on mute unless your name is Julie Blanchett. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, so you will also be asked to provide the location or the address where the death occurred. And then additionally, you'll be asked to provide information on any burial or funeral insurance policies, as well as any assistance received through donations, voluntary organizations, other government programs, if applicable. And then you'll also be given the option of whether you want the funds to be direct deposited, in which case you'll also be requested to provide your routing information and your checking or savings account number. So I also want to mention that if another person has also incurred funeral expenses for the same deceased individual, you may want to include them as a co-applicant. So for example, you and a sibling shared expenses for a parent, and you both paid for some of those expenses. You'll want to include them as a co-applicant, and that'll provide them with access to update the application, And so when calling in, you'll also need to provide their name, social security number, and date of birth. Now, if there's another individual who also contributed to funeral expenses, you can also provide those expenses or those receipts for consideration. Next slide, please. So after you apply for assistance, you'll call in, you'll apply for assistance, and we will send you an RFI letter, a request for information letter, and then that will outline all of the documentation that is needed to process your application. So if you intend to apply, if you could start gathering that documentation, it will include a death certificate. So that death certificate must indicate that the death may have been caused by, it must indicate that the death is caused by or may have been caused by COVID. So it may say it was likely caused by, likely the result of, or similar phrases that indicate a high likelihood of COVID-19. But again, it must indicate that COVID-19 was either the cause of or an underlying cause of. So if the death certificate doesn't include anything related to COVID, you may be able to change it or amend it, and that process would start with contacting the person who certified the death. That could be the doctor who provided the treatment, it could be the coroner or medical examiner, and the name and address of that individual will be on the death certificate. So you may have the death certificate amended as needed, starting with the reaching out to the person on the death certificate. Second, you'll need documentation of the expenses incurred. So some examples of expenses could be receipts, funeral home contracts, or invoices. So that documentation must include the name of the individual who incurred the expenses, so yourself or your co-applicant, the total amount of the expenses. It must include the decedent's name and the date that the expenses were incurred. And again, the expenses must be incurred after January 20th, 2020. And finally, you'll be asked to include any documentation of other funds that you may have received from another source. So that could include burial or funeral assistance. It may be financial assistance received through a voluntary organization or another government program or agency. Move on to the next slide, please. Do you have a blank slide there, or is that just my screen?
Just your screen, Julie. It says Funeral Assistance Awards.
Okay, great. I will continue then. So funeral assistance is available up to $9,000 per decedent. And you may only have one application per decedent. As I just mentioned, you can have a co-applicant, but you can only have one application per decedent. Again, so if there are two of you who have contributed, you'll want to appear as applicant and co-applicant. And if you are both applying separately, only one of you will receive assistance, and that will be provided to the applicant who provided all of the documentation first. So we do have a maximum grant award for, because this program is within the FEMA Individual Assistance Other Needs Assistance Program, there is a maximum grant that can be awarded per disaster, and that is $35,500. So if there are multiple, if an applicant is applying for multiple decedents, the maximum amount that they could receive in total would be $35,500, and that would also include any assistance that they received through FEMA's Lost Wages Assistance Program, and that was a supplemental unemployment assistance program, and that would be up to $1,800. So it is possible that if an applicant is paying for funeral costs in multiple states, those would be part of different disasters, so they would be subject to separate maximum grants. So they would not count toward the same maximum grant. Some eligible expenses include, not limited to, but they include expenses related to funeral services and interment or cremation. They can include transfer of remains, casket or urn, burial plot or cremation niche, marker or headstone, use of funeral home and equipment, and costs associated with producing and certifying the death certificate. So again, those are some of the expenses, but not necessarily all. Could you move to the next slide, please? And I cannot see the screen, I apologize. So the funeral assistance process, as I mentioned, the program began on April 12, 2021. Once, I feel like I have missed a slide in here. Did I miss a slide? Okay. So I think one thing that I'm sorry, it's difficult without the slide in front of me. Are you on slide 7, Deb?
Julie, we're actually on slide 9, but we're also seeing a number of people now saying that they have a blank screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's just a lot of words on the screen, so maybe just speak with the possibility that people may not be able to see what I see.
We should be
Are
on
you on slide 9?
I don't think I have a slide 9.
Funeral assistance process?
Yeah, that's the one. That should be slide 7, funeral assistance
All right,
process.
it says 9 on the bottom.
Okay, strange. All right, so again, the program began on April 12th. All of the information for how to apply should be listed on the webinar here now. The call center hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Central Time, or 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And your documents, so after you apply, after you call, you've received your RFI, or your request for information letter. We're recommending that you create an account at disasterassistance.gov. This would be an easy way to upload your documents, either in PDF or JPEG format. Once you upload them, it may take up to 72 hours for them to appear in your account, but that will help expedite the process. Or you can also mail them in or fax them in. And again, all of that information is available on the website, or the phone number is also available in the presentation. We have also,
Julie, we lost your video feed. Can you try starting your webcam again? There you go. You're back.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, this is near the end of the presentation, so I think it's okay. And then we've also included video. It's about a 9-minute video that also can help walk you through the process and give more detailed information about uploading your documents, about the information that you will need prior to the application. And I think that is the end of the actual slideshow, Deb. Not being able to see it, it's hard to say.
Yes. Well, let's see. Yep, that was the last slide that we had for you. The following slides are just some information about our upcoming webinars. But I think we can go ahead and take some questions right now.
Okay, great.
All right, and just give me a second. So is there an income cutoff in order to qualify for this assistance?
There is not. There is no income requirements.
Okay. Do people with prepaid funerals qualify for this assistance?
So prepaid funeral expenses are not eligible.
Thank you. In the event of a death due to COVID-19 and paid through social services, can the funeral home submit expenses not covered by social services?
No, unfortunately, it is a program for individuals and households, so it must be an individual who is applying for the assistance. The relationship is irrelevant. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, as long as the individual who is applying for the assistance, their name appears as having paid or incurred the expenses. But it must be an individual.
Okay. Does this program only cover funeral expenses for people who have passed because of COVID-19, or can this also be accessed by family members experiencing financial hardship due to COVID-19 and may not be able to afford funeral expenses for unrelated deaths?
Mm-hmm. So one of the requirements of the assistance is that the death must have been caused by either a cause of or an underlying cause of death must be COVID-19, and it is a requirement for that to be indicated on the death certificate.
Thank you. Can you tell us, how does the $255 death benefit from the Social Security Administration impact the amount of payment from FEMA? Is it deducted from the FEMA payment?
So FEMA will not duplicate any benefits. So if there are expenses that are covered with any other assistance, including a Social Security benefit or other government assistance, FEMA would not reimburse for that expense. But there may be additional expenses on top of that that have not been covered. And again, it's a maximum amount per decedent up to $9,000.
Okay. Is there a cutoff date for when deaths occurred? And initially, I understand it was for deaths in 2020 only. However, your slide doesn't include a terminal date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. So the initial legislation was for deaths through the end of 2020. But the act that was signed earlier this year by President Biden extends that through fiscal year 2021. So as of now, I believe anything current or ongoing is covered, could potentially be covered. And I believe that's through the end of fiscal year 2021, which should be end of September for now.
Thank you. Would life insurance count as funeral or burial insurance?
That would be a question you would have to discuss with the caseworker when you are applying. I can't speak to specific types of insurance and what they would or would not cover.
Can you give examples of who are considered non-citizen nationals or qualified aliens that are eligible for this assistance? Example, legal presence but no legal status person.
I'm sorry, Deb, can you repeat that?
Can you give examples of who are considered non-citizen nationals or qualified aliens that are eligible for this assistance?
I cannot speak to immigration status, but I know that I believe we have someone from External Affairs on. I don't know if you guys can speak to that, or someone else who is on the line can speak to that. If not, we can certainly get more information back to you.
Okay, well, I don't know that anyone from EA has joined us, so why don't we leave that question and we could return to that one.
Great.
If the funeral
there's a legal definition somewhere, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. If the funeral was paid for through government assistance, will the family still be able to apply for reimbursement through FEMA?
If the expenses were already paid, FEMA will not duplicate those benefits, regardless of where it came from.
Thank you. Does the funeral home statement need to be paid by the applicant, or will FEMA pay the funeral home directly for an unpaid account?
FEMA will reimburse an individual applicant, not a funeral home.
Can you explain the $35,500 max? What is this referring to versus the $9,000 max per decedent?
Certainly. So our FEMA Individual Assistance Program has a maximum capped amount every year. It alters slightly every year. I can maybe best explain it to you in terms of normal assistance that FEMA provides, for example, through repair and rebuild assistance. So if your home is damaged or destroyed, FEMA will pay up to the maximum grant. So we will not provide any. You may have receipts for above $35,500, but that is the maximum amount that we will pay. So it's the same for this program. There's a maximum amount that we'll provide to any individual applicant, and that is that maximum grant of $35,500. However, there is a maximum grant per decedent of up to $9,000. And again, that there must be receipts provided, so it's not, an automatic $9,000, but it's up to $9,000. So, for example, if an applicant has paid for 5 different expenses and paid $10,000 each, FEMA will still only pay up to $35,500 total to that one applicant.
Thank you for explaining that. For the documentation, do you have to submit a certified death certificate, or can you accept a copy? Will FEMA accept a copy?
So it must be an official death certificate. I haven't actually been asked that question before. I'm going to assume it has to be an official copy, but a copy.
So if you have an official, I guess if you have a certified death certificate, would FEMA accept like a photocopy of it or a scan of that? I would imagine.
Well, it will be scanned into, it will be, you'll scan it into when you start your disasterassistance.gov account, you will upload the document into, so you'll have an electronic copy of that document that you can upload.
Thanks. Can you, wait a second. They moved my questions on me, so just give me a second. I think Allison is trying to accommodate the additional webcam that was added for the ASL interpreters. So if you just give me a second. We already did that. Does the death need to be in the United States, or only the individual applying for funeral expenses needs to be living in the United States and be a citizen?
So the individual applying for the assistance must be a U.S. citizen, national, etc. The decedent does not have to be, but the death itself must have occurred within the United States, U.S. territories, or Washington, D.C. So both.
Is this one about the nationals I see again? What if the funeral was postponed due to restrictions and has not fully taken place at the time of application? Will estimates from vendors for future expenses be considered?
Mm-hmm. So as I understand it, estimates are not considered, but an invoice is. So it must be an actual cost and not an estimated cost that will be reimbursed. And at this point, there is no end date for applying for assistance. So you don't have to apply now. You can wait to apply until after you have gotten the invoices or receipts.
Is there a coverage limit on that grant? I mean, the number of members in a family who have died from COVID. I think what they're trying to say is if they have multiple family members who they've had to bury due to COVID, would the grant be applicable to each of them?
So again, the only maximum to remember is that maximum grant of $35,500. So if there are multiple deaths in the same family and it's the same applicant, you can apply for assistance for as much as for as many of the decedents as you want, but you will be capped at $35,500 for the total assistance. Now, if you have multiple family members who have incurred expenses for different family members and they apply separately, they would each have that maximum grant. Or if deaths occurred in multiple states, again, there would be separate maximum grants.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Let me just see. I think we just have a few more for you. If a nonprofit assisted a family with costs, will they be able to get reimbursement for that? Will that be considered duplication?
So I think there are maybe two separate questions happening here. The first is only an individual may apply for assistance. And again, that individual's name must be, they must have proof that they paid for the expenses. So we wouldn't be able to accept an application from organization ABC with that organization showing as having paid the expenses. And then the other part of that would be if an organization already paid expenses, FEMA will not duplicate that assistance, and applicants are being asked to provide documentation on any other funeral assistance they may have received. And again, so to clarify, if the total expenses were $5,000, were $10,000, and the applicant got assistance from a program, a voluntary organization for a portion of that, they may still be eligible to receive assistance for other expenses. FEMA just will not duplicate what has already been paid for.
Thank you, Julie. I'm starting to, all the questions are starting to blur together. I don't think I asked, I'm trying to remember if I asked this one. If a person has critical surgery delayed because of COVID and then they later die due to the delay in surgery, is that a covered situation?
So again, the certifying official on the death certificate must indicate that COVID is a cause of death or an underlying cause of death. So that must be indicated on the death certificate.
Please clarify, if the deceased passed from COVID-19 and the funeral occurred, if the family paid the expenses, they will not be eligible for the FEMA grant? Does this then mean the funeral expenses should not be paid pending confirmation of eligibility or approval?
No, I'm sorry, Deb, can you read that again?
Sure. It says, please clarify, if the deceased passed from COVID-19 and the funeral took place, if the family paid the expenses, they will not be eligible for the FEMA grant? Does this then mean that funeral expenses should not be paid pending confirmation of eligibility or approval?
No, ma'am. Families can be reimbursed for expenses incurred. We just will not reimburse for expenses that were paid through other sources such as insurance, other government assistance, or voluntary organization assistance. But if a family paid those expenses, they have the receipts or the invoices, those expenses may be eligible for reimbursement.
Okay. Is the funeral reimbursement amount considered taxable by the IRS, would you happen to know?
I don't believe so. That's something I'll follow up on, though.
Okay, I'll leave that in there. What if I have multiple family members die across different states or territories across the USA? Will I be eligible to claim them under just one state or each respective state, or it doesn't matter?
Can you read that again, please? Sorry.
Yep. What if I have multiple family members die across different states or territories across the U.S.? Will I be eligible to claim them under just one state or each respective state, or it doesn't matter?
The application will be under the state in which they are deceased. So if you have family members who died in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, you would have 3 separate applications for each of those states, or what we call disaster DRs, disaster responses.
Okay. Thank you. And what is FEMA doing to guard against fraud?
That is a question that I will definitely refer to external affairs for. So if you do not have external affairs on the call, then that is I think that's not a simple response.
Okay. I will leave that question for you to follow up. Those are the only questions that we have for you, Julie, that did not involve, very specific cases or very specific situations. We can certainly share the remainder of the questions that we didn't answer. Maybe you could circle back to the individuals. But we have answered all the questions that were general. The guidance, there is it a fact sheet? The funeral assistance fact sheet is in the download here pod. Allison, I think we covered up those notes, but I think you wanted to refer people to the website and to the video. Allison, can you make those visible to everyone? So in the presentation notes, you'll see that there's the phone number to call for FEMA assistance, the days and hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 9. There's the link where you could find tons of additional guidance, as well as to the link that the video link that Julie referred to. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Julie, before I go to closing?
No, I just wanted to thank you, Deb, Allison, and your team for facilitating this presentation. I know this is a really important subject and a really important program, and I think you only stumped me a couple of times. We will get those responses back to you, but again, thank you all for chiming in today and bringing such great questions, and that's all. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Julie, and thank you to our participants for joining us today. We have lots of great webinars coming up. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on the FEMA.gov as well as the FEMA R2 site. Coming up in the next few weeks, we've got the mitigation series, getting ready for hurricane season, wildfire prevention, dam safety. Mitigation, we are doing a monthly series on expanding mitigation and who's getting involved with it and the different kinds of groups. We'll be doing that the first Wednesday of every month through December. And if you would like to see all of our upcoming webinars, they can be found at the first link. All of the recordings for today's webinars and past and future webinars at